Welcome to the CannMed Coffee Talk podcast, where we talk with the leading minds in cannabis science, medicine, cultivation, and safety testing. I am your host, Ben Amaralt. I'm the marketing manager at Medicinal Genomics and proud member of the team that puts on the CannMed conference. Speaking of the CannMed conference, have you gotten your tickets yet for CannMed 2022? If yes, then I can't wait to see you out in Pasadena this May for another fantastic event. And if not, what are you waiting for? Head over to CannMedEvents.com now to get your tickets. At CannMed 2022, you will learn from the leading minds in cannabis science, medicine, cultivation, and safety testing. And if you want proof of that, look no further than our keynote presenters. Representing our science focus area, we have Dr. Ethan Rousseau presenting about cannabis and psychiatry. Representing our cultivation focus area, we have Dr. Seth Crawford talking about innovations in hemp breeding. Grace Bandong, our safety keynote presenter, will talk about building a comprehensive analytical testing program. And finally, Dr. Bonnie Goldstein will discuss cannabis medicine for children as our medical keynote. Those presentations alone are worth the price of admission, but please go to CannMedEvents.com to see the full schedule. And if you want a preview of what you can expect at CannMed 2022, check out our CannMed archive, which is a searchable video library of all the past CannMed presentations and panels. Find that at CannMedEvents.com. At this year's event, we are also offering a full-day pre-conference medical practicum taking place on May 3rd. The medical practicum is led by Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, Dr. Dustin Sulak, Dr. Kevin Spellman, and Eloise Thiessen. Each of them will share the latest medical cannabis research, including information on dosing, drug interactions, and different product types. They will also share their clinical experience they have acquired treating patients with medical cannabis. This really is a must-attend event for any healthcare professionals who are interested in recommending medical cannabis, but it's not limited to those folks. Anyone who is interested in learning more about medical cannabis can and should join us for this event. Head over to CannMedEvents.com/practicum to learn more. Of course, if you can't make it to CannMed 2022, we have a number of resources to help you stay engaged with our community and enjoy some world-class educational content. You are already off to a good start listening to the CannMed Coffee Talk podcast. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so new episodes download to your device automatically. Second, we have the CannMed archive that I mentioned earlier. It's a searchable video library of all the past CannMed presentations and panels that you can find at CannMedEvents.com. While you're at CannMedEvents.com, be sure to sign up for email alerts. That's the best way to make sure you are up to date on all the latest CannMed news and special offers. Fourth, we have our CannMed Community Facebook group, which is a great place to share and discuss news and topics related to cannabis science. The link to that group is in the show description. And finally, you can follow us on social media. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn. Just search for CannMed Events. This episode, I spoke with Jaime Brambila, who's the co-owner and founder of Grace Health and Wellness and Heed CBD. Jaime and his wife Nicole specialize in coaching and educating patients about the clinical use of cannabinoids and other plant-based medicines. The principal aspects of their mission are to democratize plant-based medicine and democratize the science, taking the complex pharmacological information and breaking it down so everyone can understand the therapeutic potential. At CannMed 2022, Jaime will present a case study in which the combined use of cannabis, psilocybin, a ketogenic diet, and conventional oncology treatments induced remission in a stage 4 metastatic breast cancer patient. That patient just so happens to be Jaime's wife, Nicole. During our conversation, we discuss the lack of awareness and training amongst physicians about the clinical use of cannabis, the enduring stigma around cannabis use, how cannabis can be used to treat cancer, how Jaime and Nicole built the infrastructure necessary to have access to consistent, high-quality, pharmaceutical-grade cannabis medicines to treat her cancer. We also talk about the barriers that prevent other patients from accessing that same quality, consistent cannabis medicine. And finally, we discuss the collaborative project that Jaime and Nicole have assembled to take cannabis formulations against cancer through the drug approval process. Before we get to my conversation with Jaime, I wanted to thank this episode's sponsor, Grace Health and Wellness. Grace Health and Wellness aims to enrich healthcare through compassion, empathy, and scientific knowledge so we may turn the corner and achieve a better age of holistic well-being, nourishing mind, body, and soul. They do so by producing effective plant-based medicines for individuals seeking alternative therapies. Learn more at gracehw.com. Okay, and without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Jaime Brambila. Good afternoon, Jaime. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Hi, Ben. Thank you for having me on.
So I'm really excited to talk with you today because I know you and your wife, Nicole, have had an amazing cannabis journey that spans both your professional and personal lives. So I think the best place to start is for you to tell the audience about how you got started in the cannabis field and sort of the events that have got you to where you are today.
Sure. Oh, and first of all, I wanted to just express my gratitude for being on your podcast. I think you really are doing a great job putting these podcasts together for before the convention. So, yeah, we got started in the cannabis space back in 2016. We had a small delivery service out in Southern California. And initially, we had gotten into the space because we thought it was a good business opportunity. Quickly, we found out that all that green rush rhetoric was just an illusion. And we started focusing on really trying to help out people because we started getting phone calls from people that were in dire straits looking for answers with cannabis. Mothers that had children with epilepsy, autism, people that had cancer, severe neurological disorders. And so we really wanted to provide them with the best information, the most practical information for them to find efficacy using cannabis medicines. And that's kind of how we got here. Uh, when in the middle of our research, trying to search for answers for patients, my wife Nicole was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic breast cancer, and automatically, it was a no-brainer to use all of the knowledge that we had gained to help her because we knew that cannabis could save her life.
Wow. So you're obviously kind of in a unique position there, having had experience with medical cannabis and knowing that it could be effective for your wife's diagnosis. How did you first tackle that? How did you first apply the knowledge that you had gained in the industry to helping her?
So we knew that even though it's a pretty nascent science, the concept of cannabis turning off a cancer cell, we understood enough to try to pursue this. There's no clear reference as to what type of cannabis strain will positively respond against a cancer cell line. So we did our research. We placed it up to God, and we gave it a chance, and we had excellent results as a result. We were privileged to enjoy those results because we know that for a lot of people that this is not an option simply because they don't have access to it.
Yeah, and we always talk about how there's sort of a number of different variables here in order to kind of find an effective treatment, right? Because first, there's a number of different types of cancer. Cancer is sort of an umbrella term that describes a lot of different conditions. And then, of course, on the medicine side, on the strain side, there's a lot of different chemical profiles in these strains that are all kind of grouped under cannabis. So, how did you go about, identifying which strains might be effective for your particular case or your wife's particular case?
Sure. So we were very fortunate to have people that were very knowledgeable about this subject around us. We've been very privileged to have the guidance of practitioners that have a lot of experience with this. And at the end of it, we had to make an educated guess to figure out what to use for Nicole, specifically because of all the factors that you mentioned that are involved. You know, I think that as we go further in exploring this topic, we're going to find out that there's a lot of specificity between, the patient's genotype, the plant's genotype, the chemotype expression, how to bridge the gap between all those three parameters, right? It almost seems like it's individualized medicine that we need
Absolutely.
to adopt to figure this out. And so, for us, it was just a matter of doing our homework. We would focus on strains that have really wide profiles of minor cannabinoid groups, and our strains are proprietary. But I'll tell you this: they're strains that are closely related to their wild ancestors, if that
Hmm.
makes any sense.
Sure, sure. So you mentioned that you were fortunate to have access to a lot of great doctors who had, experience using medical cannabis. Um, what was your experience working with other doctors who maybe weren't in the cannabis space, but you were, in the course of treatment telling them that you were going to use cannabis? What was their reaction? Were they supportive? Were they knowledgeable? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben. It's actually prompted us to take on our mission, really, because we still have a medical system that looks at cannabis, regular cannabis use, as a cannabis substance use disorder.
Hmm.
The idea for physicians at large to use cannabis therapy on a consistent basis, we're still a long way to figuring that out in the clinics. We're still a long way for doctors to adopt that. And from our personal experience, I can tell you that when we were trying to look for the best cancer care for Nicole, we were living in Southern California at the time. We moved to the New York tri-state area specifically to look for the best cancer clinic that we could possibly source for Nicole. We had the opportunity of having an oncologist that was a world-renowned drug discovery researcher, very well versed in targeted therapies. We exposed the science to the doctor. We explained that we were using cannabis in the context of trying to find a solution for cancer. And even though she saw the results, she saw the scans with her own eyes, she couldn't explain the results. At the end of the day, she told us, well, you're part of the very few and very lucky people that get a result like this, but I don't know anything about the science. So we still have an old guard in the medical science community that's still holding strong, and I really believe that it's because of the stigma that cannabis has tied to it. Even though this is thoroughly researched in preclinical essays, we still have a medical community that is unwilling to look at this because they have their preconceived notions about cannabis.
Yeah. How much of that do you think comes down to like a lack of training as well? Because I know that, healthcare professionals, they're not learning about the endocannabinoid system in their training.
Correct. That's one of the big reasons. So we don't have proper training for medical professionals to understand this very complex system in our physiology. In fact, we've done a lot of advocacy and a lot of trying to raise awareness for the benefit of patients to have an open relationship with their physician about the use. And it's not something that they can even wrap their head around. Some doctors believe that you know the endocannabinoid system, or nowadays um, how we know it as an endocannabinoid dome, is too good to be true for them, in short. And so, to understand such a complex system of ligands and receptors, interacting compounds, cannabinoid mediators, all firing throughout our system at the same time, perfectly choreographed to create a balance throughout all of our physiology. It's a hard concept to bring across. And so, some universities are looking at the science and adopting courses to educate people that are willing to learn. But it's still for the cannabis enthusiast. It's not part of a medical curriculum yet. And so we need this to be looked as a as a viable clinical approach in medicine. That's the only way that we're going to get this into the clinics, and this is a reality that we have to grapple with if we really want to see this back again in the U.S. pharmacopoeia.
Yeah, we agree 100%, especially here on the CannMed side, where we're trying to do our part. We're partnering with our good friends Bonnie Goldstein, Dustin Sulak, Kevin Spellman, and Eloise Thiessen. They're leading our one-day medical practicum, where we invite healthcare providers and anyone who's interested to come and get sort of a one-day crash course, master class, whatever you want to call it, from some of the real titans in the industry. So if there's any healthcare providers out there who feel like they need a primer on the endocannabinoid system and all the things that cannabis can do in the clinical setting, please definitely check that out.
Yeah, that's a wonderful opportunity that you guys offer, because you have some of the most brilliant minds giving instruction on this topic, which is it's a rare thing.
Yeah, and like you said, when you were sort of early in your cannabis journey, when you were on the side of being a medicine provider, you saw firsthand that how many people are lacking guidance, for lack of a better term. And, they know that cannabis can be helpful for their condition, but they just don't know where to turn. So I think we, as a cannabis community, really need to do our part to help educate those providers so they can help their patients.
Right. No, that's such an important part. And bridging that gap of giving enough information for physicians to confidently prescribe this to patients. We need to do a lot of work with that. We need to do a lot of work with that. And the cannabis education plays a big role. Having consistent and reliable supplies of pharmaceutical grade botanical drug preparations. It sounds like a
Absolutely.
soup of letters there, but the viability of having these available in dispensaries, we're still a long way from having these available to people. At dispensaries, they focus on creating a CPG product that's going to be good for the consumer, that's going to sell. They're not looking at consistent reproducibility with chemotype expression, so that if a person that uses this and is able to correct symptoms of chronic disease, they can go back and source the same product over and over. We still are a long way from having access to that type of formulation, and so we lived through that throughout our own experience with Nicole. I
Mhm.
really want to just emphasize this, because we were very lucky to be in an industry, to be established in an industry, to already know how to produce these formulations. And just to give you an example of all of the infrastructure that we had to build, all the know how that we had to create, all the parameters that we had to consider, we had to source the strains that we thought were going to produce the anti-cancer effect. We had to convince seed banks to share their genetics with us. We had to source cultivators that had the capabilities of growing these plants in controlled environment, and that were willing to set aside production space to exclusively grow these strains for us. We had to learn sophisticated methods of extraction, so that we made sure to extract all the therapeutic compounds from the flower, and while still maintaining chemical integrity of the cannabinoid groups. We really believe that the acid cannabinoid groups have a lot of potential.
Mm.
And to tie all this together, we had to figure out quality testing to to really make sure that we were getting the same chemotype expression, to make sure that the quality of the product was always the same for Nicole. And of course, the clinical guidance, right? How do you start off with a particular dosage, with a starting dosage? How do you titrate slowly to avoid side effects? And then how do you make such a robust cannabis regimen functional for a person? That those are the very critical points that most patients do not have access to.
Right.
Most people are not going to build a lab to uh, get consistent supply of cannabis flower to produce their own cannabis medicines and put together all this infrastructure. It's just not. It's not realistic. So this is why we have to make these available for people.
Yeah, no, that's amazing that you were able to put all that together, literally from like not seed to sale, but we say that term as kind of you know to express the whole life cycle of a product, but you've certainly done that. Um, so yeah, you're right. I think the average patient, the average consumer, certainly doesn't have the resources or the know-how to put something together like that. So what do they do?
Well, so it's a sad thing that we don't have this available for patients, because we see it all the time. We see it in the infusion rooms when we see people that are going through the harshest of cancer treatments, and doctors don't have the effective tools to deal with those side effects yet. So
Mhm.
we have antiemetics, we have anti pain medication, we have anti anxiety medication. At the end of the day, it may or may not work for a patient. Some patients take it diligently, and they become numb to their situation.
Mm.
That's the reality of the situation. Cannabis does such a great job at getting rid of those side effects, and doctors know this. We've known this since the 80s, since the 70s. Under the table, doctors will recommend to their patients, hey, well, why don't you try cannabis? Maybe it'll ease some of the pain or whatever. But really, they don't go beyond that. And so the sad reality is that patients that don't have a lot of resources to figure this out don't have the best reference to gain the knowledge, to gain the access. They look towards their medical professionals, and they're not willing to talk to them about this.
Mm.
We have very few doctors that do recognize it. Most of them because they have seen positive results with their patients, and they're turned on to it, and so they make a little bit time during their really busy schedule to research a little bit about it. But that's just a select few. So we really need to raise awareness so that we can give people the knowledge and resources to figure this out.
Yeah, and that's a great point too. So how primarily was Nicole using medical cannabis? Was it to sort of alleviate some of the side effects of the other treatments that she was using, or was it specific? Was it actually, targeted to try to actually reduce tumor growth or anything like that?
Yeah, it was specifically, so we knew that we could try to use cannabis to turn off cancer cells. So
Mhm.
that was the end goal. To get to that point, we had to slowly introduce her to cannabis. In Nicole's particular situation, she was very sensitive to the effect of THC.
Hmm.
So when you have a patient that's highly susceptible to the psychoactive effect of cannabis, you have to move very carefully and very slowly to titrate that dosage up to the levels that we thought were going to create an impact against the cancer. And usually these are levels that surpass, 400 milligrams of THC on a daily basis, or
Wow.
the same amount in the acid cannabinoid group, maybe 1,000 milligrams of CBDA daily. So these are really high dosages to get a patient on. If you don't know what you're doing, you can really put off the patient with a bad experience. So We had to make sure that the strains, that we really understood the therapeutic effect of the strains, whether it was a mood enhancement profile or a mood depressing profile that would create somnolence, for example. We had to figure out how to appropriately dose each formulation throughout the day so that we could create this as a functional experience for Nicole.
So I was wondering if you could speak specifically about the presentation that you're going to be giving at CannMed. Give the listeners a little preview of what they can expect there.
Sure. So we're gonna all the science that we have researched that we have collected to figure out this project. We're gonna explain during our presentation. I'm gonna give an overview of all the identified mechanisms through which cannabis can turn off a cancer cell or create that programmed cell death, apoptosis. I'm also going to explain how we used cannabis in combination with psychedelics. We use psychedelics to ameliorate the depression that's really tied to the side effect of standard cancer therapies and the prognosis of having a terminal disease, because metastatic breast cancer is a terminal disease. We where I'm going to explain how psilocybin in particular has possible anti-cancer mechanisms, just like cannabis, and in fact, um, cannabis and psilocybin signaling pathways to turn off a cancer cell interlap,
Oh,
ironically. So I'm gonna speak about that, and then I'm gonna talk about Nicole's case study that is going through peer review publication right now. What we're doing is a result of our experience. We have all this wonderful knowledge. We've already solved this issue in our minds, right? It's a no-brainer. Cannabis needs to be in the clinic, but how are we going to do that?
right.
That's the biggest question. So, I'll explain more of the science aspect. I really wanted to hone in today and explain the social issues that are around this, and how that needs to be addressed so that we can get this into the clinics.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you mentioned is research, right? That's one of the barriers to really getting acceptance from, the greater medical community or even, the society at large, right? Everyone wants to see more data, but the problem with that, it's a bit of a chicken and the egg situation, right? Until we can have, the legal um, the legal framework opens up to allow for more research, we can't really generate that data. But so we're in sort of this tough limbo right now, and luckily we have folks like you and the other presenters at CannMed who are doing the best with the limited resources and support that they have to try to get us there.
Yeah, it becomes a very complex project because taking cannabis, eventually what we want to do is provide this for everybody. And the only way that we've identified that the medical community can fully embrace this is if we take cannabis formulations against cancer through the drug approval process.
Hmm.
And that's a big to do.
Sure.
The infrastructure to do that is just barely being written right now. You have FDA coming up with task forces that are evaluating projects like this on an individual basis because the rules have not been well defined yet. And so cannabis has a lot of nuances that regular pharmaceuticals don't have to deal with. There's a lot of heterogeneity in the compounds that cannabis plant produces. We're producing from whole plant formulations. So there's a lot of critical points to make sure that you have sustainably reproducible
Hmm.
formulations that can go through the rigor of FDA approval. Um, we've really taken this on as our mission. And so as a result of that, we have committed to building a team that is knowledgeable enough, that it has enough resources to actually take this through the drug approval process. And so, in order to do that, we had to partner up with some of the best academic clinical research institutions, some of the best science research institutions in the United States and in the UK. And with a project like this, you have to account for things like stabilization of your cannabis genetics, you
Mhm.
know, sustainably propagating your plants, which probably is in some sort of in vitro propagation. You have to have controlled environment cultivation. You have to have the most rigorous screening methods, like a mass spectrometry analysis, to verify that you are producing all the chemotypes and all of your profiles. You need to have capabilities to identify unknown cannabinoids because we still don't know
Sure.
100% of the content for the therapeutic compounds that come from a particular cannabis strain. And so it's a complex process that traditional biopharmaceutical companies are really not used to. There is no precedent for this type of pipeline yet. So we're hoping to shed light on this and really, be successful in our journey.
Yeah, no, you're right. Quite the undertaking. And I know on a previous podcast, I spoke with Dedi Miri, who's out in Israel and who's doing a lot of research specifically on cancer and treating with cannabinoids. And you mentioned that you need the capability to identify those minor cannabinoids. And if I remember correctly from my discussion with him, some of the effective cannabinoids for treating a particular type of cancer that he was talking about, they were unnamed cannabinoids that, weren't even really in the literature, aren't something that your average cannabis testing lab is looking for. So yeah, I would imagine that your capabilities on that side would need to be pretty impressive.
That's correct, Ben. Luckily we have the right people in every corner to pull this together. We've partnered up with Imperial College of London. They've agreed to undertake our in vitro and in vivo studies on 8 of the cannabis extracts that we've successfully reproduced at this point, and we have now tracked clinically. We've partnered up with the University of Connecticut with their organic chemistry department, molecular biology department, first to figure out how to reproduce the chemotype that we're looking for in the plant, and then how to screen for these unknown compounds that you're mentioning. We still are a long way from knowing 100% of these compounds and what they do.
Mhm.
We haven't isolated most cannabinoids. We don't even know what they look like. So it's only this is a project for only the most seasoned scientists to participate in, because it's a discovery all throughout the journey. We may find out about things that we didn't even think about along this journey, but
Mm.
the commitment to bringing these medications to people is there, and we believe that we have a good shot at this.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that your story is very emblematic of what we're talking about here in CannMed, because it takes a village, right? You need to work with the cultivators, you need to work with the scientists, the clinicians, the laboratory professionals, to really make this thing happen. So again, that's what we try to do in CannMed, is to bring people from all the different areas of the industry together so we can kind of push this whole thing forward. So I think
And
it's a great tie-in.
no, yeah, and I'll mention this, Ben. As a cannabis community that's focused on research, sometimes we clutch onto the proprietary information that we have, right? And we don't want
Right.
to give away your secrets and all that stuff. But if we just came together and not placed our projects as valuable, but placed the patient really as the valuable person here. If we could come together and share the knowledge that we have, we could get there much easily and much quicker the trend that we are on right now.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Great place to stop. But before I let you go, I want to give you a chance to share with the audience any links to learn more about you and Grace Health and Wellness, whether it's social media, your website, or any publications that you guys have done. I'd be happy to include it in the show description so people can easily find you.
Sure. Please check out our website, gracehw.com. We have a few articles that have been published on the work that we do. In particular, there's an article on Cannabis Science and Technology magazine of an interview that we recently gave, and it just pretty much describes all of the details that revolve around this topic. When the day comes, Ben, that we're able to dispense these medications to people that really need them, that's the day that we'll be able to ease a lot of suffering in the world. So we'll be very happy to speak about our work during the presentation at CannMed and answer any questions during the conference.
Excellent. Thanks again, Jaime, for joining us on the podcast, and can't wait to see you out in Pasadena.
Can't wait to see you guys out there.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Jaime Brambila. Check out the links in the show description to learn more about the topics we discussed. And thanks again to this episode's sponsor, Grace Health and Wellness. Our next episode will drop April 27th. That's 2 weeks from today. And it's our last episode before our CannMed 2022 event. Again, if you haven't already bought your tickets to CannMed 2022, do so now. In the meantime, please do check out the CannMed archive and join the CannMed community Facebook group to stay connected with us. Of course, you can also stay in touch with us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter. Just search for CannMed Events. Sign up for email alerts on CannMedEvents.com to stay up to date with all the latest news. And please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast app. Doing so helps us reach more listeners. I do sincerely hope to see all of you out in Pasadena this spring, but until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and please join us for the next CannMed Coffee Talk.